Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. So, we continue our study in the book of Daniel. We're looking at chapter 2 today and Daniel's incredible interpretation of this bizarre dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. First, a little background. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar sent his armies. They conquered Jerusalem, took Daniel and other key young men and women captive, and they entered into a 3-year indoctrination period to not only win them over, but train them even how to think like Babylonians. And last time we talked about how Daniel and his 3 buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, did not panic, did not bail, did not whine, but they applied themselves, and God gave them incredible favor, and they became the cream of the crop. And we're going to see what happens today now. And keep in mind, Nebuchadnezzar is a crazy leader, like a lot of leaders out there today, right? Okay, so let's pick it up in chapter 2. There is an edict that had gone out from Nebuchadnezzar to all of the counselors, his sorcerers, astrologers. I had this dream. I want you to tell me what the dream is, and I want you to tell me the interpretation. And they said, no one can do that. Even the gods are not with men to do that. And we talked about last time how Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us, and he can do it. So, verses 12 through 16. Because of this, because they couldn't do it, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. Wow. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed. And they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them, his guard. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard. Prudence and discretion, he was prepared. He knew this was happening. He did not panic, and he was respectful to him. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? In other words, he didn't say, please don't kill me. He asked him a why question. Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. Daniel then went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show interpretation to the king of the dream. So Daniel is following due process here, knowing that if he appeals for an official audience, he can get it. Good lesson here. When things don't go our way with an overseer, a boss, a coach, whatever, instead of talking to coworkers about it and what a jerk so-and-so is, go and make an appeal to that position or that person who's in a leadership role. Okay. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to his 3 friends. And he said to them, seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that we might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men. And then as they prayed, they held a vigil. The mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision during the night. So Daniel wasn't going to quit until he heard from God. Then Daniel, on his own, blessed the God of heaven and said this, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and you have made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. And then it says that Daniel went in to Arioch and said, I have the interpretation, please take me to him. So here's the key. Daniel cries out for mercy, doesn't pretend to have something. He waits on God. And you know what? He knows God's going to win this thing. He has this childlike faith. Huge lesson here. In what I just read to you, this declaration, he says, Jesus is the ruler of the nations. Lord, you raise kings up and you remove kings. You know, we get into such uptight political posturing when God is in control. Should we be involved? Should we vote? Should we attend board meetings? Should we serve in our communities? Absolutely. You want to run for congressional office or a state position? Absolutely, you need to do that and be involved. Daniel sure was. He was one of the heads of state. But he understood that ultimately nations rise and fall by the hand of God. And when a nation turns from that hand, then God's judgment comes. He doesn't make it come. The people that live in it do. So let's continue and see what happens here. Daniel understands what David wrote in Psalm chapter 2 about this great helicopter perspective that our situation is only a small part of a greater piece of history that's happening. You and I right now, in say the last month, the next couple of months, we're each in a season of life, maybe in certain trials, whatever. It is part of a bigger thing God is doing. Do we know what that thing is? No. Honestly, if we knew all of what he was doing, we'd probably panic on some of it because it's so huge. Will he use us? Absolutely. Do we want to be used? Well, that's up to each one of us, isn't it? Okay? But he wants us to be involved in whatever the game is that he's doing. And David wrote this in Psalm chapter 2. Listen to this, folks. Why do the nations rage and the people plot in vain? The kings or leaders of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together and conspire against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, if I could turn the page here, bear with me, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. In other words, talking about Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Let's overthrow the God that claims to be over the world. We're the world leaders. We know what we're doing. Honestly, go and read the news or watch it. You see this arrogance from every state leader, the U.S., leaders in Europe, China, Russia, you name it. This is how God answers all of these leaders who conspire against him. And a lot of people have conspiracy theories, and let me tell you, the Lord knows all about them. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds these leaders in derision. Wow, when the Creator holds you in derision, you're in trouble. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, As for me, I have already set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I've already established the King of Kings. So here we see Jesus again in the Old Testament. I will tell of the decree, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations, your heritage, and the ends of the earth, your possession. And you shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel or a clay pot. And so once again, we see the Old Testament here, Psalm chapter 2, talking about the Father establishing his Son on the throne to rule everyone. Jesus is called King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And he will hold leaders in his wrath. Now, the key is this. We want God's wrath to happen right now for corrupt leaders. He does it over time because he's after other things, often the hearts of the people. So think about that, okay? Again, sovereign over nations, but he cares about individuals. Beautiful. And by the way, Jesus didn't come along, literally the birth of him, till 1,000 years later. This actually ties into Daniel's interpretation of the dream, which we're going to see here in a minute. So, verse 26 then, Daniel's brought before Nebuchadnezzar. The king said to Daniel, are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king and said, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dreams and the visions of your dreams as you lay in your bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed came thoughts of what would come after this, in other words, present time. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me not because of my wisdom, that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king, and you may know the thoughts of your mind. So Daniel says there's a God in heaven. He's the only one smart enough to tell you what you dreamt because he gave you the dream. And by the way, me, I'm no smarter than anyone else. Whenever you hear a preacher say, we have a new revelation, God is doing a new thing, this is a great new thing, hardly ever done before in the history of the world, be careful of all that stuff. Daniel is saying, and he's the greatest leader in Babylon with the highest degree of wisdom, I'm no different than anyone else living. Here's an old saying, if it's new, it ain't true. If it's true, it ain't new. God's always doing what he's always done. All right, everybody got that? And so he just humbled himself. And I want to take a moment and give credit to a man named Verna Smith, my spiritual father, who taught me, he said, above all things, be humble and teachable. Always humble yourself in the company of others. Never exalt yourself. Never defend yourself. Let God be your vindicator. And he pointed me to men like Daniel and David, Joseph. And he said, and in due time, God will raise you up to what you're supposed to do and give you the influence you're supposed to have. But if you try to get there by yourself, you will crumble because the power will corrupt you. And I watched this man who was raised a Mennonite, a very quiet man. He was happy in his older days to give power away to all these younger pastors, some of whom were kind of proud and cocky. And he just quietly sat. But when that guy got in the pulpit and he opened the Bible, we all opened our notebooks and took notes because he was so brilliant. There was no one like him. And you know what his secret was? Basically what he told me. Humble yourself, take the back seat, and God will bless you. That's exactly what Daniel did here. All right, now the dream. You saw, O king, and beheld a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you. Its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked at this image, a stone was cut out by no human hand from a mountain, and it struck this image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, or the weeds, if you will. When a threshing floor worked, you threw the wheat up in the air, and the extra pieces that weren't the actual stalks or the grains were blown away, like the stalks that were useless. As you looked, the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the earth. Okay, so here is the dream. All right, now let's see how he interprets it. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom. Notice the emphasis here, him giving Nebuchadnezzar perspective. You wouldn't have this if God didn't give it to you, so he's given you the dream. And into whose hand he has given, meaning you, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, the birds of heaven, making you ruler over this huge kingdom. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, right? So that's the kingdom of silver. And yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And then there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these, the gold, the silver, and the bronze. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And you saw, and in those days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Remember the stone cut without a hand? It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms, and it shall bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Okay. The head of gold, kingdom of Babylon, right? Then in 539 BC, so this is probably around 600 BC, Nebuchadnezzar gets this dream. About 40 or 60 years later, Persia conquers Babylon. They are the chest of silver. And you have kings Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, who eventually marched on Greece. And in 475 to 480 BC, several battles between the Persians and the Greeks. And the Greeks defeat the Persians. They are the bronze, right? The waist and thighs of bronze under especially Alexander, who probably conquered more territory in lesser time than anyone in history. And the amazing thing about this, if you saw the movie 300, or you read the book Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield, or you studied about the Spartan culture, and how Xerxes, with about 1 million-man army, was marching west to Greece, and he got to about central Greece, and he wanted to march south and conquer all of the nation states, Athens, Corinth, Sparta, you name it. Leonidas, the king of the Spartans, decided, we're not going to let you do this. And he took 300 select Spartans, and some Athenians joined him, about 1,000 men total. And they went to Thermopylae, and they were in a little pass by where the seashore met the land, and then there was just a short swath of land, and then a giant kind of a hillside. And so Persian army had to pass through this kind of funnel. Well, Leonidas, being a soldier, a great military mind, he met them there. For 3 days they battled. 300 Spartans, about 700 Athenians, some Thebians who left. They killed about 20,000 Persians. Now, this battle, if you considered it, looks like it stands alone. God, in the time of Daniel, right, hundreds of years before this, prophesied this through the image to Nebuchadnezzar. And then eventually, after Thermopylae, about 5 years later, the Greek navy defeats the Persian navy, and Persian's power is broken, and eventually Alexander rises. And so that's the Bronze Kingdom. Then the Kingdom of Iron. 2 legs of iron, and that would be Rome. Around 146 BC, the Battle of Corinth. I would say that is when historians say Rome kind of officially conquers Greece, and they became by far the most powerful nation on the earth. They ruled with an iron fist, no pun intended. And it was into this kingdom with the toes of clay and iron that this spiritual kingdom cut out of a mountain without hands was planted that will last forever. Let's talk about Rome and then this kingdom. Rome was first a republic. So it was existing before they defeated Greece. Then it became imperial ruled empire, the Caesars, and it became very corrupted from within. They had so much power. They ruled over all the known world. They destroyed everything around them. They were brilliant engineers. They were brilliant military minds. They loved to fight. They loved to conquer. They loved to rule. They weren't philosophers or artists like the Greeks. They adopted a lot of that culture and a lot from the cultures before them, which is important, but they were ruthless. And then eventually, after the birth of Christ, a couple centuries later, they became more and more corrupt, and Rome became weak. And it started to become attacked by the barbarians. They had been held off up in Gaul. They were now coming down from the northeast traveling west trying to get down to Rome. And so Constantine moves the capital of the empire from Rome to Constantinople. He founds a new capital, right? And that's in the 4th century. Now you have two kingdoms, east-west, two legs of iron, divided in strength, divided in loyalty. You have the Bishop of Rome, who eventually became the Pope, is now the ruler of the Western Empire there. Barbarian armies had been cutting through the Roman Empire, and Theodosius, one of the Eastern emperors, remember the Eastern Kingdom now held more of the military might, declared the primacy of the Pope. So he is called the Holy See. He's the leader of Rome, and we have the institution of what's called the Holy Roman Empire for the next several hundred years. So two legs, east and west, iron and clay. You have a religious nation state where you have church and state mixed, and so many people became corrupt and were buying each other off, and eventually religious oppression. First religious freedom under Constantine after the Christian had been persecuted for 3 centuries. Now religious oppression. If you don't join, we'll kill you. Right? Very nasty stuff. And 3 times Rome was sacked during this period, and eventually it collapsed. And so let's go back to verses 44 and 45. A stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, the timing of the virgin birth, the birth of Christ in the fullness of time. Let me give you a few New Testament verses to show you Jesus in the midst of all of this. The reason God gave Nebuchadnezzar this vision was to point them to Jesus. Galatians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul writes, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons and daughters. Luke chapter 1, the Christmas story. Listen to this. The angel said to Mary, do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. Behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call him Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. Now listen. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David that had been lost by the time Daniel was prophesying. Right? Remember, they had come into captivity. And Jesus will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Luke 1, 30 through 33. Going back to verse 44 in Daniel, and in the days of those kings, the emperors of Rome, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor shall it be left to another people, but to whom? Those who call upon Jesus, who are adopted as sons and daughters, according to what Paul said. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end and stand forever. Wow. Why did it happen under Rome? Why was this the fullness of time? Okay. Well, Rome had taken from the 3 previous kingdoms the best processes and protocols they could use, and they had established regions in their empire with local polities or local governances. They allowed people self-rule as long as they paid their tribute to Caesar, didn't cause trouble. They were polytheists. They allowed many gods. Again, another opportunity for the Christ child to be born here. They built the best roads in the world, the best that they ever seen, to connect the entire kingdom. And seaways free of piracy. They built aqueduct systems to water and irrigate, to establish an agricultural economy. They built fortresses to guard the cities that they had erected in the various regions so that commerce could increase, the passing of goods and services. They were engineering masters. If you go to Rome, I was there once, I saw the Colosseum, the engineering in it, giant stones, and there's room in the 4 corners between each of the stones, and the engineers did that on purpose, so if an earthquake came, these massive stones would shift and not break and collapse. And they allowed cultural preservation of local ways and traditions, and they used a common language, Greek, and then they also accepted local preferences of languages, which in Palestine, where Jesus was born, Aramaic was used. What happens now? So the fullness of time. Can you see how God used Rome to make it a perfect opportunity for eventually Paul to take the gospel and start the church on his first, second, and third missionary journeys throughout the Roman Empire? How did he get there? Took the roads. He walked, he rode, he took the roads. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly, your God is God of gods, Lord of kings, revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over the wise men of all of Babylon. So he is now the prime minister. He is the right-hand man to Nebuchadnezzar, the same Joseph was to Pharaoh. Daniel then made a request of the king, and he appointed his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. So they went out, and they were governors. Daniel was the prime minister. And that, my friends, sets the stage for chapter 3, which we will look at next week and see Jesus with the three. Let's conclude here. Jesus is everywhere in the Old Testament. He is the ruler of the nations. His kingdom is spiritual, real, and eternal, and that kingdom oversees what we see with our natural eyes. My seasons are always a part of a greater season that God is cooking in. And we must always remember that. It's so critical to not lose your perspective that God rules the nations. What's he going to do in America? He's beginning a judgment to cleanse it. Do we want to be a part of that? Yes, because on the other side is renewal. What a blessed time. What will the judgment look like? It's not going to be fun. That's why I think it's very important for people to get their affairs in order, love one another, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, and above all, trust Jesus. What's our role? Humility, diligence. Remember, Daniel and his friends applied themselves. Courage under duress, and calm trust when the winds blow. God does the changing. I hope this blesses you. See you next time, chapter 3.